This really is a great view of how the ancients saw their great leaders. In fact, there'd be later ancient commentators who would see Caesar in the same light. He was essentially a son of God, like Alexander. In fact, the Caesars, as they rose to prominence as Caesars, and especially as they died, it was thought that they actually became divine. In other words, they themselves were seen in terms of what we call apotheosis, which essentially means something like the appearance of God, something like the coming of God into the flesh itself. And so we're going to see that Napoleon really fits into the same sense, because Napoleon was seen in many and by many as being the true Messiah, as being the true son of the revolution who would bring harmony and brotherhood to the world, beginning with Europe. After all, the revolution sought to free people everywhere, and Napoleon was that force. In fact, the most famous quote of Napoleon's regarding the revolution, and what serves as our title for this week, is simply he said, "I am the revolution, I am the Enlightenment." In other words, all of the ideals, all of those great concepts, even though they were divorced from the scriptures, but they still had noble ends, at least that was the idea, they all found their center and their incarnation, if you will, in the person of Napoleon, or at least that's what he wanted others to think. And that's why it's during the reign of Napoleon that you see this kind of drive on his part and on his government's part to extend some kind of universal brotherhood over all of Europe and eventually all of the world. That, after all, was one of the goals of the French Revolution, was to export its ideals and its concepts of virtues. It's also during this time that we actually see Napoleon, curiously enough, bringing the church back into France, actually legalizing Christianity once again, restoring the calendar, taking away some of the craziest elements of the French Revolution. But still, it would seem as if he was doing these things as a means to gain further power. In fact, one great example of this is when he actually had the Pope come to crown him as emperor. But rather than letting the Pope place the crown upon his head as a sign that the church was something that he was going to submit to in terms of at least truth, Napoleon grabbed the crown famously from the hands of the Pope and crowned himself. He would have no masters. He would have no one who was above him. Now, of course, before we move on into Napoleon's character, we do need to take a moment and actually point out this fundamental reality, that there actually is a real apotheosis. There actually is a real aspect of God becoming man and men becoming the sons of God. That, of course, happens in the life of Christ himself, who defeats sin at the crucifixion, who defeats death at the resurrection, who allows full adoption as sons of God from the resurrection through Pentecost and on to the end of time, to glorification. So it's this whole concept that Lewis loved to talk about how the Son of God became the Son of Man so that we, the fallen sons of men, might actually become the sons of God. That's the true meaning of the term apotheosis. But still, in terms of pagan thinking that you see in characters like Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great, or you see in a modern character like Napoleon, there's this concept that man, by his own might, by his own will, by his own reason, might actually become that Son of God or even become divine himself.